Hi everyone, Ryley here from the Jams and Tea podcast, and I'm coming at you today with a very special video, counting down 10 of my favourite songs from one of my favourite bands, a band that have been in my life for many years, but that recently I've really been rediscovering them and digging deep into their catalogue, and that is of course the Swedish indie pop band the Radio Dept. Formed in 1995 by friends and musicians Johan Duncanson and Elin Almerid, the Radio Dept have, over the past 20 odd years, released a string of critically acclaimed and understated but beautifully moving records that mean a lot to me and have contributed a lot to the indie vocabulary in ways that I don't see acknowledged as much, I don't think. So they're a band that I think are ripe for rediscovery, that could well be one of your next favourite bands if they're not already, and have had a marked influence on the shape and sound of indie music, even if their name isn't held up in the highest echelons. They're a low-key and deliberately unassuming band whose songs are refreshingly unpretentious and simplistic, but easily able to get underneath your skin, from the more lo-fi guitar-based sounds of 2003's Lesser Matters, to the synthier affair of 2006's Pet Grief, to the beautiful synthesis of the two that coloured the incredibly refined and elegant Clinging to a Scheme, and then the switch to a more house-influenced dance style that the band pulled off remarkably well with 2016's Running Out of Love. The Radio Dept have never missed a beat, and now while it seems that they release music less frequently than ever, and I'm not 100% sure if there is a new album on the horizon, they seem to still be active. To me, I think there's no better time than right now to discuss what makes this band special, what makes these songs remarkable, and why you should give the Radio Dept a chance. So without further ado, let's kick off the list. Number 10, Domestic Scene from Clinging to a Scheme. The Radio Dept are always a band that have known how to open an album and to really capture your attention quickly, which is maybe something you might not expect from such an understated and gentle indie band, but Domestic Scene is both understated, gentle, and kind of potently devastating in the way that it throws you abruptly into a state of alienation and isolation and even nihilism in the context of a domestic environment that no longer feels comfortable or safe for the person in question. Johan's lyricism here is deliberately non-specific, but it evokes a kind of mundane tragedy, a sense of ennui and disillusionment that permeates so much of the Radio Dept's music, not to mention a sense of isolation among your community that ties in deeply to the well-rooted queer themes that come across in a lot of the band's music. Domestic Scene is almost over as quickly as it begins, and it rollicks forward into one of the band's more enduring singles, the glitzy and sharp Heaven's on Fire, but the more time you spend with Clinging to a Scheme, the more the song will dig its hooks into you, and the more it reveals itself to be one of the most haunting and affecting Radio Dept songs. Number 9, Every Time from Pet Grief. Immediately, it hits you. A warm but colossal cascade of fuzzed out guitars introduce one of the band's most blissful shoegaze epics. And I say epic kind of half jokingly, considering how punctual the song actually is. It lets you bathe in an atmosphere that feels not unlike My Bloody Valentine's Loveless, while embedding you in a situation where the protagonist feels a sense of disappointment, loneliness, betrayal, being fed up with being fucked around by someone unreliable in your life who you do care about, but who is pushing at your patience and testing your assertiveness. It's an emotionally complicated song, and like so many of the Radio Dept songs, it manages to be this while still being lyrically very simple, and the lyrics are almost incidental when you are just so immersed in such a heavy and intense landscape of guitars. There's a beautiful bass part from Lisa Karlberg as well that does this gorgeously loping thing that reminds me so much of James McNew's bass parts in Yo La Tengo songs, and this probably won't be the last time I mention Yo La Tengo in conjunction with this band, because the way that they can veer from gentleness, stillness to this fully fledged intensity in terms of guitar presence and warmth of sound is so Yo La Tengo to me. They are one of the bands where I think you can sense Yo La Tengo's influence most strongly, and one of the bands that I think took the mantle from Yo La Tengo in their 90s era and pushed it forward and into new exciting directions. Number 8. Teach Me to Forget, from Running Out of Love. It starts with an insistent percussive thump before the band's gentle, house-inflected, EDM-esque melodies start to slowly swirl into the track. It is emblematic of all of the exciting, new, refreshing, and surprisingly successful experimentation that the band engaged with on their most recent record, 2016's Running Out of Love. A record that is, by my estimation, incredibly underrated, even by some radio department fans, despite being an exciting pivot into a new direction that I think only widens the scope of what this band can do. Teach Me to Forget as well is one of their most adventurous and un-radio department-esque songs in some respects. Thematically, it fits in with the record's tense and politically charged sense of social dread that it really imbues throughout just about every song on here, and it kind of reaches a fever pitch with this heavily dance-inflected, deeply eerie, introspective banger. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the Junior Boys, a 2000s synth pop band that I think very much laid the groundwork for a lot of the sort of experimentation that the band play with here, along with more obvious influences as well, like 90s New Order. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's Johan's performance and the grit of the musicality that really push this one through. It is hooky while being incredibly sad. It's basically a dance floor banger about being traumatized and not knowing how to deal with that, falling into the company of someone else as an excuse for not essentially doing the work to deal with your own shortcomings and struggles. It's a fittingly opaque and kind of hopeless end to a record that is pretty comfortably their darkest to date, and I think it deserves more love and attention because there just simply isn't another song in this discography that hits like this one. Like every time, but even more so here to a certain extent, there's a surprising level of bitterness and even scathing contempt ridden within this song that gives it a kind of edge and even a slight ugliness that I think really complements the heft and weight of the instrumental, as well as the kind of skeletal spaces in between those beats too that really make you feel the sense of isolation and loneliness that this person is singing about. It's a remarkably evocative track in that way, like so much of the best radio department music is, but it does it in a way that feels entirely unique in this discography. Number 7. I Wanted You to Feel the Same, from Pet Grief. You know, it sometimes feels like Pet Grief, the band's sophomore effort, kind of gets overshadowed by the sort of instant classic that is Lesser Matters, and especially when this record tones down a lot of the noise of that album and really focuses in on something that's a little bit more spacious, a little bit more clean, and a little bit more oblique at times in the emotions that it tries to convey and in the sense of drama that pervades it. But I really do think that the fourth track on this album, I Wanted You to Feel the Same, is one of the band's most beautiful songs. It has this crushing sadness to it, it's incredibly cold, and it has this almost sophistopop influenced spaciousness and frostiness to the synth tones, but at the core of it is a powerfully simplistic and kind of crushing sentiment, begging for emotional reciprocation from someone, whether that is in the form of sharing in your joy or sharing in your pain. It has this glacial sway to it that makes it feel like an end of the night dance floor requiem, a kind of colder epilogue to a song like Teach Me to Forget, for instance. And it rolls very smoothly into the kind of epilogue interstitial track Southside as well, which is kind of inseparable with this one in my head. It's a moment of clarity and sharpness on a record that tends to get overlooked and deserves a lot more love. Number 6. A Token of Gratitude, from Clinging to a Scheme. This may be the most skeletal and sparse atmospheric track on this list. There is very little but remnants of melody, echoing and whooshing and submerged sounds. It sparkles and radiates like a night sky, and it digs into you while you listen to it, like someone has hotlined your soul. It's hard to describe without sounding a bit ridiculous like that, but it is one of the most quietly moving songs I think I've ever heard. The sentiment here is so completely stripped back to this frank admission of caring and of the transient nature of love and all these sorts of feelings that you, I think, only really express to someone when you've known them for a very, very long time. It's kind of brutal in its own way, but it's also, the candidness of it is comforting, and I think it speaks to an experience that anyone who has been through a relationship that you know can't last, even as good as it is, will be able to relate to. The whooshing, ephemeral, atmospheric sounds feel like a ghostly hug, and at this point in the record that it appears as well, at the midway point, it kind of gives you a moment to breathe and sort of submerge yourself in a gorgeous pool of sound. It is one of the most special Radio Dept songs for me for that reason. It plays with your emotions a little bit, and it hints at the complexity of a relationship that just cannot ever be conveyed fully through song, but it lets you have a glimpse into that and to see yourself inside of it, and to, if you're lucky, or maybe if you're unlucky, recognize your own experiences and your own feelings and your own ways of dealing with love. Number 5, Committed to the Cause, from Running Out of Love. I kind of hinted at it before, but Running Out of Love is a fucking angry album. There is bitterness, there is a sense of seething, sardonic contempt for hypocrisy seen in government and in social and cultural norms. Specifically, this song rebels against the crushing machine of capitalism, but does it in ways that are, again, lightly funny, with a tinge of irony, and never less than incredibly catchy and memorable. Committed to the Cause is led by this funky and absolutely magnetic bass line that pulls you into the song, that goes into so many different unexpected directions with its sound palette, that ultimately it feels like the most successful realization of their dance floor aesthetic that they pursue on this record. Full of sticky hooks that will get stuck in your head, and a surprising instrumental contribution from what sounds like a flute, but it's kind of hard to really tell. This plays with elements of dub and house and even Eurodance to a weird extent, but makes them all feel fresh and invigorated, and again unified by that intense emotion at the core of the song. That grit and bitterness and aggression that these lyrics are lathered in is actually betrayed by an instrumental that I would describe as one of the band's most fun, jaunty, upbeat, and absolutely addictive. This is a song that's super easy to play on a loop or just lose yourself in and be moving before you know it. And that's the great success of Running Out of Love, really, is that its infectiousness sinks its hooks into you until you're so swept up by the groove that the implicit and powerful messages the record is conveying have gotten right through your head and embedded themselves into your brain. It's a really smart and funny and wicked record, and this song is its absolute pinnacle. Number 4, Keen on Boys, from Lesser Matters. If you're a Radio Dept fan out there, you've probably kind of been wondering when the fuck I'm going to get to a song from Lesser Matters, which is the band's most beloved record, for good reason as well. Cold take, but this one is, I think, their best work from front to back, their most distinctive sonically, that also matches that with a consistency and power in emotion and songwriting that's pretty much unparalleled. It gives off a lot of the same vibes and slightly discomforting explorations of sexuality as another one of my favourite turn-of-the-century indie records, Broken Social Scenes, You Forgot It in People. But there is even more of an intimacy and a kind of personalism to this album, and to its best songs as well, that make it feel like each song is yours, that each song is speaking from your perspective. Even if you haven't had the specific experiences detailed in these songs, there's an emotional truth to them, or there's an emotional contagion to these songs, and the subtle, gentle evocatively devastating ways in which they are pronounced. And there are a few moments on the record or in the Radio Department's discography that cut to the wire the way that Keen on Boys does. This song, like many on this album, is overwhelmed by an atmosphere of fuzz and a really janky, simplistic keyboard preset, giving a weird but endearing counterpoint to it. And then the vocals of Johan, which are so smothered, so buried in this mix, as the feelings he's communicating are buried within his psyche as well. These feelings of connection, these feelings of gay attraction that the song is essentially about, that can never fully be realized, or at least haven't fully been realized at the point in which the song is taking place. This encounter that's detailed in the song as well, this intimate connection, this comfort in the presence of a friend that you cannot help but wonder if it could have been something more, if the two of you were missing out by not being able to fully communicate your feelings to one another, or if this was just the way that it was meant to be. A whole topic for another video would be great indie songs about gay romance, essentially, or gay sexuality, which I think is something that is explored in a lot of music that hasn't necessarily been commented on heaps for a variety of different reasons, but I think is an essential kind of permeating factor of a lot of the most powerful indie music of this era as well. Not even necessarily gay sexuality, but just explorations of queer sexuality in general, of unconventional approaches to attraction, love, self-identity as well. The Radio Department, though I can't really explain why in a tangible way, evoke a sense of recognition and validation in me for my queer identity and my experiences that I can not think of many other bands, really, that do that as powerfully and as intimately as the Radio Department do. And Keen on Boys, which is one of their most beloved songs, stands as a testament to how meaningful this band is and how important this music is in any discussion of queer sexuality and alternative art in the last 20 years. Number 3. You Stopped Making Sense, from Clinging to a Scheme. The gently heartbreaking closer to the band's third album is one of their most impactful songs to me on an emotional level, on a personal level. It is, quite frankly and upfrontly, a song about losing someone to something outside of your control. The specific topic of this song seems to be religion, or some kind of religious affiliation that strips someone of the personhood that they once had to you, the connection they once had to you. Perhaps they drift from you as their personality, their belief system, their personal philosophy changes, and as a result of that, you grow distant, you grow isolated, you start to lose something from them that you thought would always be there. And I mean, apart from that particular religious interpretation, it is a song that serves that purpose and communicates that emotion about any kind of loss, where you try to convince yourself that some kind of irreversible change is somehow permeable. The gentle twinkling and reverberating guitar feels like a caring whisper from one person to another, and feels like it echoes the sentiment that the song and the album ends out on. Whatever they told you, I'm dying to hold you. Don't let them blindfold you. Don't say goodbye. Number 2, 1995, from Lesser Matters. From its incredibly distorted and clipping drum beat to its luxuriously beautiful bass tone driven guitar lick, this is one of the most insistent, immediate, and gratifying Radio Department songs. It kind of sounds like the Strokes on Ambien if Julian Casablancas was 50% more gay and 20% more tired. You'd get a song like 1995. And even that simplistic and kind of stupid description of it really betrays what a powerful and unique song this is. This has some of my favorite lyricism in any song ever, not even just in a Radio Department song. It describes so concisely and so effectively a specific type of childhood nostalgia, a specific type of reflection that, again, those bands that I've mentioned, like Broken Social Scene, are so great at doing as well, and did so beautifully in this era, an era that was particularly contemplative and exploratory for indie, made by people in their 20s essentially, who were at that ripe age that I'm also at, where you get this particular nostalgia for the attractions, the friendships, the relationships, the feelings that you had at a most tender time of your life. 1995 is missing buses. It's walking 15 miles to see your love. It's knowing you're alive through all the fuzz. It's never coming down from going up. 1995 is cutting classes. It's sitting over coffees talking indie treats. It's the mere sensation of being the first one that you see when morning opens up the skies. You see me when daylight opens up your eyes. There's something really gut-wrenching of the insistent reminder that, to himself essentially, that he is happier now, but there will always be a type of contentment, a type of wonder, a type of perfection that you could never recognize as a teenager, and now you'll never be able to recapture as an adult. And it's something that a lot of songwriters try to capture. It's one of the enduring topics of songwriting, I think, is that nostalgia, that connection for the past, that wondrous time of youth. And 1995 is as great as any song has ever been at capturing that. Despite its waves of distortion and its clipped out beat, it still brings me almost to tears every time I listen to it. And it remains one of the band's most enduring and powerful songs. Before we get to the number one, I want to list off some honourable mentions, songs I love that I was absolutely gutted I had to leave off this list. Seriously, all 10 of these honourable mentions are every bit as great as the 10 in the list proper. So without further ado, The City Limit from Pulling Our Weight, Can't Be Guilty from Running Out of Love, The Video Department from Clinging to a Scheme, Pulling Our Weight from Pulling Our Weight, Libeling, Loose Single, Sleeping In from Pet Grief, Bus from Lesser Matters, You Fear the Wrong Thing, Baby, Loose Single, Peace of Mind, B-side, What Will Give from Pet Grief. And the number one best Radio Department song, in my opinion, We Climb the Wired Fences from Pulling Our Weight. I haven't really had cause to mention it yet outside of the honourable mentions, but Pulling Our Weight is one of the greatest EPs ever recorded, and definitely the single greatest release this band have ever put out. An absolutely essential collection of 5 perfect songs, and any one of them really could be the number one song on this list. But at the end of the day, I have to give it to We Climb the Wired Fences. This is one of my favourite songs of all time. This song, which miraculously, somehow, I hadn't heard before this week, unbelievably. This song is... shit. Very little in the world makes me emotional as this does. Again, like with 1995, the primary emotion here is this kind of lingering, longing attachment to the past. But not even just the past, specifically, but a sense of safety and assuredness and the fixed, predictable nature of the past. A kind of comfort in lingering in an experience where you know how it will play out. You know how it will end and begin. And you know that regardless of the feelings, whether or not it's pleasant or even whether it's traumatic, there is a comfort in getting to control and live through that moment again. It is longing to hold the hand of someone, to do something stupid with them, to channel all of the energy and fire and passion and awkwardness that you have into individual moments where you feel untouchable, where you feel perfect, where you don't feel anything. It's led by this beautiful arpeggiated melody that's, again, delightfully distorted and contrasts beautifully with the whispered vocal. It is vintage Radio Dept through and through. It just bleeds that aesthetic that they started off with in their early days, and as a result of that, there's some degree of comfort that I feel listening to it as well, some degree of safety that I suppose parallels the feeling that I think the song itself is trying to communicate. And again, like so many Radio Dept songs, the lyricism is sparse and evocative and sort of tells you all you need to know, better than any kind of description I could come up with. Walk you through the park and we're fine. You say you like the dark and your hand in mine. We climb the wired fences, pretending to hide. You say that you can sense there's something outside. I must be ill, keep thinking we pretend, and how long before this has to end? On self-medication, ambition fails. At best, it's simulation. Or can you set me free? I feel like I've talked a lot about emotions and vague attempts at capturing something ephemeral that barely even relates to how these songs sound. But to me, that's what the Radio Dept is. They channel experiences and emotions and feelings that you cannot express in words, and that kind of renders this video maybe pointless to a certain extent. They make you feel a sort of comfort, a sort of familiarity, a sort of embrace, even when they linger in dark spaces, even when they linger in the most morose of tones and in the most self-loathing and self-defeating of themes. You feel that sense of comfort. You feel that sense of understanding. And that's something that I think is probably true of everyone's favourite band to a certain extent. That sense of comfort and familiarity. It's true of all of my favourite bands. Los Campesinos, Yo La Tengo, The National, The Twilight Sad, Frightened Rabbit. All of these bands are unified by an ability to get under your skin and find your heart, and the instant, unwavering sense of trust you feel letting your heart be in their hands for 3 minutes. And that's my list of the 10 best Radio Dept songs. Please let me know in the comments below, what are your favourite Radio Dept songs? Do you think there are any glaring omissions from this list? It was really hard to put together, and it was absolutely influenced by personal bias, but I did try to cover as broad a range of songs and aesthetics and vibes and sounds across this entire discography as I could, while still being true to the songs that most mean the world to me. So I want to hear what your picks are in the comments below. What's your favourite Radio Dept album? What's your top 10 list? If you have a top 10 list of songs, hit us up in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. That absolutely helps so much, as does subscribing to the channel too if you haven't already. We talk about music every week, 3 times a week, and we go all over the spectrum, so there is always something for everyone. If you want to go above and beyond and support us even further, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can support us directly, become a member of the Jams and Tea family, get yourself entitled to perks such as having your name in the title crawl of every video on this channel, plus recommending us music and us reviewing that music on our main show. So, what do you got to lose? I'll be back again with another solo video in the not too distant future, I'm sure, but until then, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Radio Shack. It can be done when we do it together.